He was there to talk about rockets, Mars, AI progress. But one little girl's voice stopped Elon Musk in his tracks and pulled him into the most unexpected conversation of his life. An 8-year-old girl's quiet question silenced an entire auditorium, drawing Elon Musk into a deeply personal reflection about loss, the unknown, and what God truly means. What unfolded next left everyone in stunned silence. Then tears. The Community Tech Center in Austin, Texas, wasn't the kind of place where life-altering moments typically happened. The room was plain, folding chairs arranged in curved rows, a long table with paper cups and lukewarm coffee, the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. A whiteboard at the front read Community Q&A with Elon Musk in dry erase ink, slightly smudged at the corners. But that evening, the air felt heavier, like the room itself sensed something extraordinary was about to unfold. At the front, sitting on a simple wooden stool, was Elon Musk. No stage, no LED screens, no product reveal or flashy presentation. Just Elon, blue button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired but alert. He looked like a man who'd slept 4 hours across 3 time zones. And maybe he had. The attendees weren't investors or tech elites. They were families, students, blue-collar workers, and retired engineers. Some had brought their kids. One of them, Arya, stood out. Not because of her size, but because of the intensity in her eyes. 8 years old, wearing a t-shirt she'd painted herself with stars, planets, and the words, "Keep looking up." Clutched in her hands was a worn sketch pad with bent corners and graphite smudges along the spine. Her father leaned down beside her and whispered, "If you still want to ask it, now's the time." She nodded, gripping the sketch pad tighter. Her heart was pounding. She had written and rewritten her questions so many times it felt etched into her bones. Not a childish curiosity, but a real question, one that lived deep in her chest, one she didn't fully understand, but needed answered. The evening rolled forward. Elon spoke about Mars colonization, artificial intelligence, and the next generation of battery cells. He cracked dry jokes. People chuckled politely. But the usual spark, the kinetic, chaotic Elon, was missing. His voice wavered at times. He paused often. His mind, it seemed, was somewhere else. Then came the Q&A. A microphone was passed through the rows. Adults stood up with questions about local infrastructure, EV subsidies, AI safety. Elon answered them patiently, sometimes with unexpected warmth. But then, the microphone reached Arya. She stood slowly, the sketchpad pressed to her chest. Her voice was soft, but steady. "Mr. Musk, what does God mean to you?" The room froze. The microphone stayed in her hands, but no one moved to take it back. All eyes turned to Elon. He didn't speak, not immediately. His lips parted, then closed. His eyes found hers. This tiny girl with cosmic questions written across her shirt and stardust in her gaze. He looked away, looked up, as if trying to find the answer not in the room, but beyond it. The silence stretched. 1 second, 5, 10, 20. Then finally he spoke. "No one's ever asked me that before." His voice was quiet, almost hoarse, and unlike any answer he'd given that night, it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It was real. "When I was your age," he continued, "I didn't believe in God. Not because I didn't want to. I just didn't feel anything." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Some furrowed their brows. Others leaned in closer. Elon sat back slightly on the stool, his hands clasped between his knees. "I grew up in South Africa. My dad wasn't the kindest man. He didn't teach me about faith. He taught me about control, about silence, about pretending everything was fine even when it wasn't. I found comfort in machines, not people, in books, not prayers. If there was a God, he was silent." Arya didn't look away. Her sketchpad lowered slightly. She was listening, not just hearing, but listening. Elon continued slowly. "I remember being 12, sitting alone in my room, reading The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There was this line about how the universe is vast, uncaring, and possibly meaningless. And instead of scaring me, it made sense. If there was no God, then at least the chaos had an explanation." The audience remained utterly still. But then, he said, his voice catching just slightly, something happened that science couldn't explain away. He swallowed hard, blinked quickly. My first son, Nevada, he died when he was 10 weeks old. Sid is. One moment he was sleeping, the next, he wasn't. No one moved, no one breathed. I didn't cry, not at first. I thought maybe if I stayed logical, if I focused on the numbers, I'd survive it. But late at night, when it was just me and the silence, something broke inside me. A woman in the second row pressed her hand to her chest. A man wiped at his eyes. I stared at the ceiling for hours, asking questions, not to a specific God, just asking, why? Why him? Why me? And for the first time, I didn't want a scientific answer. I wanted comfort. I wanted a reason. He looked up again, this time at the lights above, as if they might flicker in response. And I didn't get one. Not then. Elon turned his gaze back to Arya. But years later, when I held my son X for the first time, I felt something. Not relief, not joy, something else. Like a pulse, a thread, a whisper. Like the universe wasn't empty after all. Like something had heard me, just very, very quietly. Arya's eyes were glassy now, but she didn't look away. So, what does God mean to me? Elon asked aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe God is that whisper, the one you don't hear until you're broken enough to listen. Another pause. Or maybe God is the question itself. The room stayed silent, but the silence had changed. It wasn't awkward. It was reverent, holy in the most unexpected way. A man near the back raised his hand slowly. Elon nodded toward him. I'm a mechanic, the man said, his voice gravelly. Never had time for faith. But hearing you talk about your son, I think I've been angry at something I never dared to believe in. Do you think maybe faith is for people who've lost something? Elon nodded. I think faith begins where control ends. A few gasps. A woman in the front row began to cry softly. Then Arya spoke again. My mom says God is like space. You don't always see him, but he's always there. Elon smiled. I like that. Arya looked down at her sketchpad, then back up. So, do you believe now? Elon paused. I don't know what I believe in, he said, but I know what I feel when I look at someone brave enough to ask questions no adult will. He gestured toward her, and I think maybe that's where belief starts. The audience exhaled. Quiet murmurs of agreement, a few sniffles. A silver-haired woman near the side stood next. I lost my husband to cancer. I begged God to save him. He didn't. I haven't prayed since. Do you think he still hears me? Elon looked at her with a softness that surprised even him. I think silence doesn't mean absence. And I think sometimes the universe answers in people, in moments, in questions like hers. He looked again at Arya. Maybe God speaks through the courage we don't recognize in ourselves. The woman nodded, slowly, her lips trembling, then sat. The room had transformed. No longer a Q&A. It was a confessional, a sanctuary. A man in a wheelchair rolled forward, eyes shining. I used to be angry that I can't walk, but tonight I realized something. I stopped moving physically, but maybe I started moving spiritually. The crowd, silent moments ago, now glowed with emotion. It was as if Arya's one question had cracked a dam, and now everyone was breathing in something new. Elon stood from the stool. I came here tonight to talk about rockets, about the future, but none of that matters if we don't understand why we're building anything at all. He stepped forward, looked directly at Arya. You reminded me that the most powerful questions come from the smallest voices. She blinked back tears. Her father gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Elon reached out his hand. She walked to him, and they shook hands, small palm to large one. Thank you, he whispered. Don't stop asking hard questions. I won't, she whispered back. As Arya stepped back to her seat, sketchpad clutched tightly to her chest. The room seemed changed, more awake, more connected. People who had come to see a celebrity CEO left with something they hadn't expected, a mirror. Not a reflection of Elon Musk, but of themselves, of the parts they had buried, the pain they hadn't voiced, the questions they were too afraid to ask. Elon returned to the stool, but his body language had shifted. He no longer looked like a man carrying the weight of 1,000 deadlines or stockholder expectations. For the first time in the evening, he looked light, human, real. "There's something I've learned," he said slowly, "and it's taken me decades." He scanned the crowd. Faith doesn't always look like belief. Sometimes it's the act of not giving up, of building even when you don't understand the blueprint, of loving even when it hurts. He paused, then added, "Sometimes faith is sending rockets into space, not knowing if they'll return. And sometimes faith is watching someone you love disappear and choosing to keep living anyway." A hush fell again. Then a teenage boy stood up from the side of the room. He looked nervous, fidgeting with the sleeves of his hoodie. "Mr. Musk, do you think we're alone?" Elon tilted his head, curious. "In the universe?" The boy hesitated. I mean, in everything. In our thoughts, our doubts, in the dark stuff, the nights when no one sees us." Elon didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped down from the front of the room and slowly walked into the aisle. He stopped beside the boy and looked him in the eyes. "I used to think I was completely alone, even when I was surrounded by people." He gestured to the ceiling. "But you know what changed that?" The boy shook his head. "Moments like this." Elon turned to face the crowd again. "When we let our guard down, when we stop pretending we have all the answers, when we realize that asking why isn't a sign of weakness, but the first step toward meaning." He looked back at Arya, who now sat scribbling something in her sketchpad with fierce concentration. "My sons ask me all the time what's out there. I tell them the truth. I don't know, but I tell them to keep asking." A murmur of approval echoed through the crowd. Then, as if compelled by a shared current, Arya stood once more. "I drew something," she said, holding up her sketchpad. On the page was a rocket, but not a normal one. Its shape curved upward into a giant question mark, and beneath it, instead of flames, a trail of stars. The audience smiled. Some wiped away tears. Others nodded deeply. "What is it?" someone asked gently. Arya looked up, eyes steady now. "It's faith," she said, "because it doesn't always make sense, but you still launch it." The room went silent. Then, applause. Not loud or explosive, but soft, steady, reverent, the kind that comes from deep in the soul. Elon stepped forward again. His eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with something close, something felt. "I've spent my life building engines, rockets, systems, but tonight a little girl reminded me that the biggest questions can't be solved with code or math. They require listening and courage." He gestured toward Arya. "She reminded me that maybe God isn't something we define. Maybe God is something we glimpse, in the quiet, in the brokenness, in the bravery of a child." He looked around the room one last time. "So ask yourselves tonight, not what you believe, but what you long to understand. Because sometimes faith isn't about certainty. It's about still showing up, with your questions in hand." The room exhaled as if a collective breath had been held all night. And finally, as the final words sank in, a standing ovation broke out. Slow, deliberate, meaningful. Not for fame, not for spectacle, but for honesty. Elon smiled gently, waved once, and began to walk off stage. But before he disappeared, he turned back one final time. "If something touched you tonight," he said, "don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Someone out there needs to know they're not alone." As people filed out of the hall, some in silence, others in quiet conversation, Arya and her father remained seated. She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think Grandma would have liked it?" Her father nodded, voice thick. "She would have loved it. And I think she would have said God was listening." Arya smiled softly, then closed her sketchpad. Outside, the sky stretched out in an ocean of stars, and somewhere in the vastness between silence and meaning, a whisper remained. If this story moved you, ask yourself the question Arya did. What does God mean to me? And if you're brave enough, share your answer. Because sometimes the bravest questions lead us to the truths we didn't even know we were missing.